Cool. All right, and we're back. So yes, break apart the showcase, break apart the kitchen sink, individual pieces, and then be running them as each individual entry point. Performance tests and bug reports was the next big thought to say, how do we make sure that we're continuing to be as best as we can be? This requires a little more interesting back-end work on this tool to teach it to always be running the latest compiler versus an old compiler, and say, okay, how much better is the compiler getting? Or if I have these two different options, if I can build something with a hash map versus a linked hash map, and then test the iterator out, make sure that the iterators are the same speed, using the same version at the same time. And then bug reports to say, here's a simplified example. I can guarantee it works because we can demonstrate this source code, this compiled output. And here's the bug report. When you see this, you know something's broken. So here's a quick screenshot. I'm not exactly sure how well the live demo is going to work, given our fun so far. But here's taking one of the showcases, one of the cell table showcases, and just copying and pasting the code from within the showcase example, and then eventually running it. It's running an iframe here. I haven't styled the iframe itself too much further. And basically, it's a matter of grabbing whatever's in there already, strip the showcase stuff off of it. There's some extra widget stuff that it adds. There's a bunch of extra methods it implements, and a whole ton of annotations you got to pull out. And then once you grab all that, put it into this sort of IDE, hit the compile button, you do get the output pretty much as expected. So why did I call it Viola? Well, got to start somewhere. You've got to have a name. You want it to be somewhat notable. I'm not really sure if I've done the job here. I'm certainly open to change, and I'm looking for suggestions. But my basic thinking is it's like a fiddle, you know, it's a musical instrument. But rather than just fiddling around, we've got a little more class. We're not just a violin. Okay, we're a viola. Viola is a bit larger than a violin. I don't know if anyone here play any stringed instruments or ever played any. I played the violin in middle school and high school, and apparently, for some reason, the viola tends to be the butt of a few jokes in the orchestra room as well. So the most notable one that I remember, what's the difference between a violin and a viola? The viola burns longer. So, and I could go on, because I was a violinist. So, but, I'd like to think I've learned the errors of my ways, and I wouldn't do that again in the same place. But, so let's try a live demo. Let's see if we can get away with that. I know there's a little bit of lag. When you first load up the page, there's a simple little home page just saying, here's what I've got working right now, warnings about this may not stay running. Every once in a while it does go down. What my current to-do list is, what new stuff I want to be adding. So adding support for other common widgets out there. Full text search, right now it currently just says take whatever word you entered and start from there and work its way forward in the alphabet, like going through a phone book, not like searching the internet. Show the log while compiling. That's actually working once you fail a compile. It gives you a log. And then copy all the showcase and kitchen sink examples. And then longer term, adding more WIT libraries, dramatically improve the IDE. It really needs it. And support downloading a whole project as a zip file that you can then run your local machine. So if you normally log in, you're going to show up like this. You're going to need to log in to do something in order to actually save things, because I don't want to allow people to just click the compile button over and over and over again, waste resources. I tie it to a particular account. In order to up the burden of creating an account slightly, I say you need to use OAuth to do this. And I'm using Google OAuth, which we're seeing it go through right now. Once that finishes, you're logged in and have access to the projects you've created and your own account, however you've got that set up. So let's start with making a new project. Give it a name, meetup. This is a project. Okay, lab demo, so far so good. So when we start off, default gives us a simple HTML page, a simple GWT XML, and a simple entry point, which is totally impossible to read right now. So instead of hello world, hello meetup. And at some point, hit the compile button, say, okay, let's actually run it through, make all this happen. This is farming off to some machine. Right now, it's probably a Red Hat machine. Christian's hooked me up with some resources at Red Hat to get these things compiling. And then I've also played with getting it to run on Google Compute Engine units, which are fast but a little more expensive. So in theory, once it's up and running, once one of those agents are running and they've compiled once, it's a lot quicker to compile a second time because they've already loaded up most of the classes we need. So in this iframe over here, we see hello meetup. We click on it, and and you guys don't see the alert message. But I see an alert message. Trust me, it's here. So it. You want to see it?
You're only sharing the browser.
Yeah, I know. All right. Alert.
Pull it into the camera.
So if we made a mistake for some reason, let's just demo that as long as we're in there. For example, we can't type. Click compile. Oops. So there's a bug. If there's not enough room, it kind of flickers a little bit. But showing our progress bar, this does take a little while. It's not perfect. Incremental compile will make this magically even better. Ah, okay. So there was an error occurred during compiling. If we click on this, we do get our standard log messages. It doesn't expand by default just yet. Telling us, okay, label can't be resolved with type, all these other things. Oh, there's a token here. So true to form for any language, it's going to give you some other details along the way. But this is the same output you'd normally get if you were running locally. The same kind of output to say, hey, you got something wrong. Ideally, we'd get a little more instant feedback here. And I've heard rumors of 2 different GWT projects that are doing Java IDE stuff within the browser. So I'm going to be in contact with them to say, okay, how much of that can we reuse here? How easy would it be to get a hold of this? So remove it again, compile it again. That way the final saved version is actually working. And while that goes, let's go back over here. So how do we do all this? Basically, like I said, I heard that the compiler was speeding up and it was about to get a lot faster. So let's try to run the compiler in other places. Let's try to do other fun things with the compiler. I've heard some suggestions we do need to watch out for what exactly is running the compiler, turn off certain optimizations, and be talking more closely with the GWT team to say what exactly shouldn't I be doing to make this work correctly. It's backed by CouchDB, which lets me not solve some of the problems that I had in putting this together. So for example, I'm using the conflict resolution mechanism in this particular NoSQL database to deal with my queuing mechanism. So basically, there's some number of objects out there that have this flag set on them that say they're ready to be accepted by any agent. Some agent grabs it and says, okay, I'll try to change you to now taken. If it tries to commit that version, someone else has already taken it. Oh, they get a conflict, they ignore that one, they move on to the next one. I haven't yet hit enough load to truly test this, so at some point today I'm hoping people will actually give this a try. Let me know if you break things. I would really like to hear about it. Also, easy attachment storage, because I've got a lot of text files I want to throw at this thing and have it work it out. There's the regular HTML, Java files that you're generating as the source, and then there's a whole ton of generated JavaScript that needs to be managed here too. And then IDE in a browser, how hard could it be? I mean, there's several hundred megabyte applications out there. There's other projects like Collide that are trying to pull this off. What could go wrong? So in theory, do you have a question or just okay? In theory, the agents scale up as needed. OpenShift hosts several instances for us. We're thinking we'll have somewhere between 1 and 5 of those running basically all the time to make sure that everything works, depending on what the baseline support we need to have. If it turns out people are clicking this every 5 minutes, we'll probably need at least 1, maybe 2. If it turns out they're clicking it a lot more than that, we may need a few more. If it turns out a little less, okay, we can live with a little bit less. It's also going to depend on how fast GWT is compiling. I've got a build that automatically turns on Google Compute Units as necessary. So it says, okay, there's no agents idle right now, start another one. No agents idle a minute later, start another one. Just to scale up and automatically deal with the load. It seems to work pretty well. These compiler agents don't need to have anything persistent. They just turn on. They have an ID that they register with the database with, and then they go off and do their thing. The website and the database right now are persistent. Right now, the website can handle just about any load we can throw at it. The database is actually the weak point in the system right now. And unless we go the real NoSQL route and try to spread that across several machines, it's not going to make any sense to have multiple web servers running. So while I was at this, like I said, this was trying to be a learning experience, figure out what else I could do along the way. I get the idea of MVP. I've seen it happening in larger projects, and I've liked the kind of structure it did, but I've never really done it myself. So, and with apologies to the ArcBees team, I picked up GWT and tried it for a couple of days and said, yeah, I just can't bend this way. It just won't quite go in this other direction. So I said, heck with it, I'll make my own. I wanted to know, how do we solve the search engine problem? A lot of good apps are internal-only applications, and this is why they are not really all that well known. They're running hundreds of thousands or millions of lines of code behind firewalls. No one sees them. In order to get them into the more public sphere, we have to make them actually able to live on the visible internet, and they have to be reachable by search engines for that. I wanted to batch RPC calls. I love the ideas of Request Factory, but I don't really enjoy using it very much. I wanted to bring some of those features to RPC. Got that there. It had been a couple of years since I did anything with OAuth or OpenID, and while I was at it, I said, well, I've reinvented everything else. Let's go with a new implementation of how we do web servers. So very briefly, because I don't have a ton of time here, when you hit the application, any given URL you're at, so for example, I can't look at that. Here I'm in a project. The project has an ID, and then there is a file within that project. And if I click on something else, then it changes what the path says up there. Basically, it's a routing mechanism, kind of like what you might see in Sinatra, and sort of what Juice Servlet likes to do. I'm sure there are other examples of this. And search project place is kind of the basic place activities idea. It is an auto beam, so it's just an interface with getters and setters, and it has somewhere in it. So this first one has a query, get and set query. Edit project has get set idea and get set active file. It's optional. It doesn't have to be there. If you don't have it there, it won't activate a file when you get it. So when you visit this URL, it will create one of these tokens. It will pass it to some activity mapper and say, okay, which presenter basically do I pull up? How do I give it this place? How do I make it go off and do its thing? So far, so good. It works its way down the list, figure out which one it's going to map to, and then goes off and tries to work. This may not be legible. So this was a quick presenter to say, okay, how exactly, if we hit search, the first one on the list, how do we take that query at the top there, Q equals whatever the query is, and do something useful with it? One of the few things I did not reinvent, but I know someone else in the room has, is juice and gin. I left it exactly as is. To say, okay, I need to be able to make search requests, and I need to have a place manager to say, here is how I start issuing requests to change where I am in the application right now. And then when do we actually go? This is a lot like activities places. Take the place, make a request to the server, say, go ahead, search all the projects, here's the query, and when you get them back, grab the view, tell it here are the results. And the view does something to make that happen. And then there's two more methods in here. Cool. Search, so in other words, when the user types something in, how do we pass it off to the presenter to make the work happen? And then select, when the user actually clicks on something, how do we navigate to a project editor place to actually edit that project? So it's pretty standard MVP-ish kinds of things, trying to take some ideas from both sides of how other people liked it to work. The view thing, then. We need the view to work on the client, right, because it is a GWT application. We need the user to interact with it. But then I also wanted it to work. So a search engine could hit the page, could hit that same URL, and you could still get content. The search engine happened to be given the URL, Q equals showcase. We wanted to find all the showcase samples throughout the tool. So the way I define a view is, first of all, it's a widget. It might return a widget if it can. If it can't return a widget, it'll instead return a bunch of safe HTML to say, here's the content I have. And then on the flip side, I said, okay, here's your presenter. Somehow you are generic on a presenter. You'll be given a presenter that you're going to call to and do something with. So on the client side, everything implements the isWidget side and returns null or just throws an exception for as safe HTML, because you shouldn't get to that point. You should instead just say, here is all the content as widgets. And on the server, then, a completely different implementation that just returns a giant string of HTML. It just says, slap this on the page. This gives a good enough idea about what I'm trying to convey to the user. Let them go from there. So, before we get to that next piece here, this means that if I'm at this page here, which I'm not at yet, okay, if I turn off JavaScript and reload the page, I get the name, the description, all the various sources that I saw here, and links to go to these other pages, which have all their content. If I search for something, the application still works without JavaScript. It's hideous, but that's okay. For the most part, search engines don't care too much about what they're looking at. And we can certainly make it better. We can make it just the plain HTML we want to have here, and then run from that. So there are a lot of samples. Here's one from someone else in the, oh, you can actually compile it and make it work. All right. Actually, this is a bug right now. Right now, the server-generated version of this generates invalid URLs. I'm not sure if we can see the URL here. Yeah, I'm going to stop playing. OK. So a while ago, I put something else together after discussion with a group who loved the idea of RF, but didn't really like actually how you end up making calls to the server. And from that discussion, I spent a couple of days playing with putting together this thing I'm calling RPQ, which is RPC serialization, but request factory queuing, batching, and firing. You can either say, every time I make a call to a service, fire it right away, or you can say, make a call, make a call, make a call, make a call. OK, now fire that whole package off all at once. The idea being you can get all that work done all in one piece. You can say, OK, within the same thread on the server, I want you to do this, and then this, and then this, and you can reorder how exactly you want those to behave. I don't know if this is generally usable. I certainly know it has bugs, but it happened to work well for this project to say, let's try and do things in batches in the server. It also runs on the server, and what this means is if you have a presenter, for example, that's injected an instance of how to make a request, on the server, when we run that presenter, we don't want to actually make an HTTP call back to the server. Instead, we just want to say, OK, here's the interface that I'm calling into, and here's the actual implementation. The interface is asynchronous. The implementation is not. Call the synchronous implementation and return it through the callback synchronously. So just a very small amount of magic to say, proxy magic basically, to say, allow the presenter to do anything on the server as if it was going through HTTP without all the HTTPs.
So you are running the presenter on the server?
All presenters run on the server. That's how it does the static content generation, which is this. Because it has to somehow go and get the content from the database rather than making two implementations of the presenter. It only bifurcates when you get down to the views. So then authorization. My idea initially was, well, I don't really want to think about this. I'm not really good at all the security stuff. I would rather not have to mess with it. I would rather not limit people by some other means, but like paying me money, to say how many different compiles do they get in a day. I would rather have someone else rate limit how many accounts can be created. So we'll start off with OpenID. OK, there's really not OpenID. All the OpenID docs and blogs from about a year and a half ago point you at OAuth 2, which magically solves it. Well, auth and OAuth 2. No, that's authorization, not authentication. Anyone here know the difference between the two? It's important. It's really important. So how do we authenticate, not authorize? Well, it turns out OAuth 2 lets you say, I would like authorization to authenticate. And we call that OpenID Connect. So there's OpenID and OAuth, which came out nearly the same time, and then OAuth 2 with OpenID Connect. But OpenID Connect is part of OAuth 2. I slightly regret having gotten into this, but it works, so I'm not going to be complaining too bitterly. It works. It gets a little bit squirrely with people who've got multiple Google accounts set up right now, and also not finding too many OpenID Connect providers. There's tons of OAuth providers. There were tons of OpenID providers. There are not a lot of OpenID Connect providers. So right now it's confined to just Google. And then, like we said, there's only one other wheel. We haven't totally tried to reinvent here. We're using Java instead of JavaScript. We're trying to run Java on the server as if it was JavaScript. Let's say do Java on the server, serving web content, but without J2EE, without the pretty well understood ways of handling servlets. So this is a project that Jim Northrop originally put together. It's called Relax Factory. Uses Java Neo packages and custom HTTP parsers, handwritten to work through how, when you see a request come in, how do we take it apart, figure out what they're asking for, and send them something back with relatively low overhead. The main overhead we're after here is not time, but heap, trying to not be too unkind to the heap. The particular implementation we've got now, I am just a little bit behind the bleeding edge right now, but it all has RPC and request factory endpoints, and it has some Juice servlet-like bindings. That way you can, there we go. That way you can say, okay, for a get URL, when there's some compiled URL coming in with this content, hand it off to this proxy over here. If someone ever tries to call get OAuth callback, pass it on to this OAuth callback visitor, which does the other two legs of the call. So what's next? What else has to happen here? There's a lot of stuff I'm trying to cover here very briefly, but a much nicer ID. I'm hopefully going to not solve that problem myself because I'd rather not get into the IDE building business. A full text search would be nice. I would like to be able to search all the different projects and their source to say, can someone show me an example of how to use this particular class? Support other GWT libraries. GXT, GWT Query, mGWT, Arai are the ones I've got listed at least so far. And across multiple versions. I'd like to say, okay, what happens if I mix and match these things? Let's worry about what versions actually work well with each other, with GWT 2.7 and then 3.0, cutting CSS support, who is still using CSS resource instead of GSS resource, how do we make sure to handle all those different constraints? And then probably the only reasonable, quickly addable thing on this list is how to download a complete sample runnable project. So it'll work in IntelliJ or Eclipse or just from the command line with Maven. So with that, any questions?
Debugging enabled. No
debugging. I decided not to put source maps because of the huge amount of connections that creates to go grab all those different files. So far, no super dev mode effectively. You can try and debug it yourself, but it does compile to obfuscated to keep network traffic a little bit down. Just trying to optimize slightly where I can.
You talked to Brian. He actually built a source map debugger. I don't know if he's in the room.
Yeah, but you still need to download the source maps. It's not going to be any different than Chrome. So.
Yeah.
So what are
the underlying logic? The underlying logic of having to like load it up and then figure out where to how you separate the map and back.
Why is this? Is that a traffic concern or what is it?
I'm just trying to limit my exposure right now. What problems could I possibly run into? And flood of all those other downloads. Right now, there is no way to grab an a Java file directly, which means if there was, you could put conceivably anything in there and have it be basically my stuff just serving as a giant content hub of stuff. Right now, the only stuff you can pull down is what's actually been compiled, and I'm rate limiting compiling. I'm trying to not be a general repository of content. I'm not Dropbox.
So, okay, so I think the first thing we want to do is actually incrementally compile.
Absolutely, yes. But unfortunately, in order to get the little progress bar, I actually do the calls to pre-compile, compile, and link myself, and those APIs change from 2.6 to 2.7, and actually 2.5 to 2.6. So that code is not stable enough for me to build off of to still get the nice progress bar.
Couldn't we just build something into the SDK that just throws event in certain places in the compiler and?
I think we added something to what I did for a account project, which is a listener. You get called. Oh no, I didn't. I never checked that in. One time I added a listener super dev mode, so you can get it in if you run the code server inside of another application like your servlet engine. You can get a callback internally. But then later on, I just figured I changed it, and I just go to /recompile. I just do a URL get back to myself.
Yeah, so this is the same thing we need in super dev mode itself, is that the super dev mode progress bar does not have a cancel button, and it was because I thought, well, in order to do that, I got to actually implement it, and there were other things that seemed more important. So I never actually did that, but it sounds like that sort of work of making compiles cancelable seems like a good thing. And
I haven't considered that too closely. For me, it's been how do I provide a custom tree logger implementation? That way I can easily persist that log without going through a giant string of content. Then, how do I actually get the current state? Not canceling, but what is the current state?
Yeah. Yeah. Even without canceling, it's just like, oh, well,
right.
Where are you?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think we can probably.
So
one thing you could look into is that the compiler does publish lots. Besides the tree logger, it does publish these stages through the speed tracer. You can hack into the speed tracer API because every time it does something like, okay, I'm beginning this optimization phase, it basically like reports it to speed tracer.
So
Which I've seen but never tried to use.
So there's probably one other thing we want to do, and John can probably correct me on this. But with incremental compilation, so right now you're basically doing a whole word compile all the time. What you actually would like to be doing is have all these pre-compiled modules already that basically build up a user, because people are not going to change user in there, and then just compile there one small module and link it together.
And I think that'd be true for the big modules that are in GWT itself, but that starts to get interesting when you've got two versions of GWT that can be compiled with the same setup. You've got to figure out how do you unload. I'm not sure if that's explicitly supported, to have two versions of the SDK on the same class path, or separate class path.
The problem with there is that we come with the configuration property problem, and we haven't solved that for incremental compile yet, which is that you essentially need one pass to collect all the properties, and a second pass to actually do the compile. And if any of those properties, as long as all the properties are the same, then we could probably cache the second path.
Yeah, but there's no guarantee you're going to have the same user. Hopefully not, in fact, the same user coming to the same agent every time. We don't want any kind of fixation there, because right now you're limited to 20 compiles a day. It's going to likely be a lot less than that.
If you've got different versions of the SDK, they have to run in different processes because the shared class paths.
Well, but I'm thinking separate class loaders.
Maybe it'll get that.
The main problem I've had there is that there's some use of object output stream that gets a little grumpy if it's not in the root class loader. But I have not dug deeply into that. I was hoping to have some time to talk about it here.
So I think what this is kind of drive is like I think we've had, as one of the things Ray mentioned in the keynote, is we want to be able to embed the GWT compiler, and since that's what you're doing, you're bringing up all the issues of this is why it's hard to embed the GWT compiler.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn about module def loader, exactly how it behaves. And then, by the way, once you've got a module def instance loaded, you can do all those fun type oracle lookups without having to worry about the whole rest of the compiler.
Yeah.
So that conceivably could be a jumping off point to do autocomplete.
Yeah. So I guess the question there is super dev mode is reaching into the compiler internals. You're kind of reaching into compiler internals. How can we wrap this up in a bow and have a nice stable API that anyone wants to embed the compiler can use?
Yeah.
And this is super dev mode is one of the use cases. This is definitely another one where we would want to get to the point where we could say, okay, this is it. This is how you embed the GWT compiler.
Also, something to be aware of, just because you get a type oracle from the module def doesn't mean that compile is not happening. Actually happens. Compile has it.
Right, and that's why it takes so long to get that piece done. That's actually the accepted phase. When it says accepted, it should in theory be pre-compiling already, but type oracle grabbing is costly.
Yeah, when you have a module def, you do get compilation state and then get type oracle. You've got half to compile.
Well, I think it's a lot less than half, at least as of 2.6.1, which is what this is running. It's closer to 10%, 20%. Right. Other questions other than the guts of it? Trying to include other folks in here. Brandon, you got something?
Do you have a contributing workflow set up, or?
GitHub. Let's see. So there is in the wiki some quick build instructions. They may not be totally current, but it's how to build it, how to run a compiler agent itself, and how to run the web server itself. I know at least Christian's managed to get through the agent side and get that built.
No, I filled the whole thing.
You got the web server going too? Cool. Okay.
That's fine.
Good. So it's not just in my machine. Right now, there definitely is a compiler error in Git itself that I need to fix, and I will do that soon. But I tried not to change it the night before the demo.
So I think it would be really cool if we could embed this on GWTproject.org.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
All the
definitely open to that.
samples.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess the main thing, to get from the flaning around the stage to something actually deployed is probably some kind of security review.
Yes, probably. Yeah.
And that's kind of
There's a lot of service there.
That's really scary from a security engineer's point of view, because you're running the entire GWT compiler, which is not designed to be invoked by untrusted agents. So there's a question of well, we've got a compiler, maybe we should put that into, make sure that that's in a sandbox that can't be broken out of.
And that's why so far I've been offloading to machines that I have no other data on, like the OpenShift resources.
Yeah,
where you just spin up free
that
blocks.
helps. That will be part of this is why we think this is secure.
I think what happens is you could spin these up and manage VMs,
And that's
they're automatically sandboxed.
It'll automatically spin them up and shut them down too. So, well, I'm not sure they do for the backend servers.
Or you could use the cloud, start computing.
And that's what it is, compute engine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing you probably want to do in terms of security review is basically push a certain amount of information into the agent, not have the agent be able to read
right
any
now,
other
it reaches out
data.
to the database because it pulls for work, because a given compute agent you have to have running for a minimum of 10 minutes, or you're charged for 10 minutes, and the startup time is about 5 or 6 minutes. So you don't want to have 6 minutes every time you do a job. You want to either be push, which means you need public IPs, or you want to have it pull for work from some known queue, or relatively unknown. Hopefully not everyone has access to it, because then they can take work and upload whatever they want arbitrarily. So yeah, there's definitely some problems with this.
No shop around some cheaper providers, Digital Ocean or.
Yeah, for just running an instance for a long period of time, there's definitely cheaper. For fast and on-demand now, it looks like compute is the best option out there. No question. Other questions? Yeah.
So generators are arbitrary code.
Yeah, I don't allow those.
Okay.
The only generators I allow are in the SDK itself. My plan to do some kind of approval process for libraries is to allow people to say, here are my generators, and here's what they do, and I promise that I don't do anything nasty here. Basically, I have to trust, or I have to read the code to see. Yep, I don't actually compile any of the .java to .class, and I explicitly only whitelist XML, HTML, CSS, and Java files to be uploaded. Not even progress files right now, which is a problem.
So one of the things I think, if you eventually want to turn this into a REPL, like get a project that work, I think there's a way we can address this, go down the amount of memory and other resources, which is we could basically only have the thing load a pre-compiled version of, this is within the context of the compile, core and elemental, where elemental is all in the interfaces anyway, so there's no JS, and well, ML 2.0 will be. And core is basically, pretty small, pretty simple. It's pre-compiled JS. Then you give somebody a text box where they can write one class, and the only thing they can refer to is basically core Java and basically elemental. So they could write simple little web programs,
Which
which would let people write little samples on the website and try it out. But you wouldn't have to basically compile all of GWT user or compile like vast amounts. You wouldn't run a generator. You basically only essentially translating one class to JS.
But then you cut off UI binder samples. You cut off anything that does any other.
That's true. But I mean, I think if you wanted to basically just have some little playground where someone could play around with some stuff, you could get away with that.
If we can define further down with that, and then have multiple instances of the IDE, one that is just pure, here's your class, work in it.
Yeah.
That would work, but no CSS resource, no GSS resource, no UI binder.
But I think it's a great way to.
No jQuery, because it runs a ton of generators.
So I think one of the key things is that is incremental compilation for this, because we can have the work done and cached before we actually kick anything off. These GWT files that we're outputting, if we can find a way to make this user has already been pre-compiled and it's no work to be done, and you only need to do this one module
Per version, per
GWT version, yes.
Well, other jars too eventually, other modules eventually too.
Yeah.
I mean,
the other libraries that are allowed on this, but it's an amount that's you can basically see this happening.
And it would essentially have to be a database where the key is a set of properties in a GWT version, and the value is the set of libraries.
I mean, or worst case, each agent builds its own and then just hangs onto it for its own lifetime. I mean, worst case, the first one's costly, the later ones are cheap.
We kind of discussed this before, but we don't.
Exactly. You have to think about what's the cache key in order to get a deterministic result.
That's the point. We don't need the properties to be. We don't need to associate this precompiled pieces with properties if we don't access them or do anything on the compile time based on that. We can't just generate code that accesses the properties. We have discussed this before, but you can generate the code that accesses the properties, and then you don't have a problem.
So then you basically are much cheaper, because you're just going to compile a module less than a second, and then you do a final linkage and serve up the application. So you should be able to do this then, I don't know, 3-4 seconds.
Yeah, something like that. So, and in the short term, if you wanted to, you could mess around with the changes to the persistent unit cache directory, because probably you can cut your current compiles in half if you got persistent unit cache hits, but you'd have to manage with persistent unit cache with being seen and reused by which.
Yeah, it's been since February since I actually got the compiler bits to work for themselves. So I'd have to go back.
You might want to make a split with the persistent unit cache. So there's one that's basically immutable for shared version of everything, and then there's the mutable one, which is like the current thing.
Yeah, so this is actually the kind of thing that will actually attract more newer developers, right? You make it, okay, you can't build a huge app, but you
can get started very quickly.
Yeah, you can get started, and this
It also will
really
help
good
bug
work,
reports,
right?
test cases a lot. Let's say there is a bug, we can just ask people, can you provide a code sample in this? And today people are, well, this is too huge, I cannot do it, and they post patch files, it's a complete mess. But if you can reproduce it there, you basically have a test case.
It also radically changes the documentation or the way you teach people. If you look at Go, for example, the Go website basically essentially invokes a server-side Go compiler, compiles the output and runs it, and it's a really pleasant experience. There's like a complete like online book, basically. It's you a page at a time, and it basically like you just run the samples in the browser.
And there's no reason we can't expose this as an iframe too, subject to making sure I'm not a Dropbox, because this is already an iframe. There's no reason that can't be loaded from some third-party source, but have the two tabs of source, actual running view, iframe either side by side, or tab to switch between.
Yeah, and actually the advantage you have of restricting the user is good, so you can actually train them to not program in a bad way.
Well,
That's
don't write
generate
CSS.
them.
It's not allowed. Don't write.
So is a possible like stepping stone towards the full thing where it's open to everybody? We could possibly have a website like this that's maybe only open to, say, liquid maintainers, that we can essentially host all our sample apps. Because that was something else I didn't get very far yesterday, but we were thinking about, okay, how do we create a new sample app website that you can upload sample apps and keep them up to date everything, because it's currently down. And this the next thing might be, oh, we can easily go online and change our sample and redo it very quickly.
So in theory, this could be that without too much work. I've got a couple of showcases that we started going through. The template is a different example that I actually got UI Binder to work with. Right, I keep looking at that to try to move it there.
Yeah, so that would be the, this is obviously more ambitious, but that might be a way to get from, something that's like completely hand sample apps to something we can modify easily, and then that's something that can actually open to the world.
And this is open to the world. Anyone with a Google account can log in.
Okay, so it's working right. Okay.
Hopefully, you can take the load of everyone in this room. We've been able to get up to a couple hundred connections per second before Couch starts complaining bitterly. And the web server and the Couch instance are running on a very, very cheap VPS right now. So the heavy lifting is all on the compiler.
Yeah, we could move it to other infrastructures.
Yeah, certainly, but that's what
Are you using the free quota right now? Or?
I have a friend who hooked me up with a little bit of resources to pay for it for a few months.
I got
about halfway through that right now.
I think we're kind of getting over the time
We
here,
certainly
so.
are.
If, I just had one question. If there were a way to make these sample projects into a self-running, standalone, what would that look like? Would that be with or without Maven to kick off
it could be
server?
I mean, in theory, whatever it's POM, or it's a class path and project, or whether it's an IntelliJ file, it's going to be one file that's consistent for everybody, and it would just be dependent on the XML, and it would just be a download button to say, give me one of these three options, or NetBeans. I don't know if anyone uses NetBeans for Quit. I've heard it's happening, but I've never seen it.
I've seen people.
Okay.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I had just before people. So the next one was sort of a bit Q&A.
Well, let's stop recording.